On April 10, 2026, footage surfaced from Jon Jones's recent trip to Russia, showing him on camera telling an interviewer that his gloves were hung up, that he was chilling these days, and that there was no more fighting Jon Jones, and the MMA world processed that as the retirement announcement it appeared to be. Within hours of that footage circulating across every combat sports platform on the internet, Jones was in a completely different interview telling the Schmo that he had spoken to UFC Chief Business Officer Hunter Campbell that very evening about a potential return to the octagon. Two statements, same man, same day, one declaring retirement, and one cracking the door wide open with a phone call to one of the most powerful executives in the organization. And for anyone who has followed Jon Jones for more than 5 minutes, none of this contradiction was remotely surprising. The story that produced this specific moment did not start on April 10, 2026. It started with a retirement, a White House card, a hip that qualifies for replacement surgery, a lowball contract offer, stem cell treatment facilitated by Joe Rogan, and a war of words with Dana White that turned genuinely personal before any of the reconciliation happened. Jones stopped Stipe Miocic via strikes at 4 minutes and 29 seconds of the third round at UFC 309 in November 2024 to retain his UFC heavyweight title. A performance that was a punctuation mark on a career that had already defied every standard of logic the sport had applied to measuring individual greatness. The victory over Miocic was his second heavyweight title defense and his 15th UFC title fight win, a record no fighter in any division in the history of the organization has matched, accumulated across a career that included the light heavyweight championship from 2011 to 2015 and again from 2018 to 2020, and the heavyweight championship from 2023 to 2025. The one fight that would have cemented his legacy beyond any remaining shred of debate, the unification bout with interim heavyweight champion Tom Aspinall, never happened because Jones requested a payday that the UFC would not meet and walked away from the negotiation rather than accept what he considered a lowball number for a fight of that magnitude. Because Jones stepped away without fighting Aspinall, the interim champion was elevated to full heavyweight champion by default. The MMA world exhaled and assumed the book was closed. And the book was never closed, because it never is with Jon Jones.
The announcement that the UFC would host a fight card on the South Lawn of the White House on June 14, 2026, as part of the America 250 celebrations, came just weeks after Jones retired, and he immediately wanted back in because the stage was precisely the kind of spectacle that he has never been able to walk away from. On July 4, 2025, the day after the White House card was announced, Jones rejoined the UFC's anti-doping testing pool and relisted himself as active on the official UFC website, ending a retirement that had lasted approximately 2 weeks, which, in retrospect, should have told everyone everything about how permanent that retirement was ever going to be. The matchup the sport immediately locked onto as the obvious headliner was Jones versus Alex Pereira, a clash of two division champions, two fighters who had dominated multiple weight classes, two men at the absolute peak of combat sports mythology whose callouts of each other in the weeks after the White House announcement made the fight feel inevitable. Jones was training, was vocal about wanting to compete, was telling interviewers that it would only be fitting for an American to fight for the championship on that night. And then a stranger with meta glasses recorded a private conversation that changed the entire framing of his physical condition and handed Dana White a narrative weapon.
The Meta Glasses footage showed Jones in a private conversation explaining to a fan that he had severe arthritis in his left hip, that most people did not know about the condition, and that he already qualified for a hip replacement, which was not information Jones had intended to share with the MMA world, but became the most discussed topic in combat sports within 24 hours of the clip surfacing. Dana White used the footage aggressively at the UFC 326 post-fight press conference, telling reporters that Jones had never been even remotely in his mind for the White House card, that some guy with Meta glasses had filmed him talking about his hips being so bad he could barely run in a flag football game, and that doctors said he should have a hip replacement. Those words were delivered live at a press conference broadcast across the sport, and when the Freedom 250 card was officially announced during that same event, Jones's name was not on it, with the heavyweight division moving forward through an interim title fight between Pereira and Cyril Gane instead. Jones did not take the exclusion quietly and responded with one of the most detailed and pointed public statements of his career, saying that his team had been in real negotiations with the UFC for the White House fight, that he had come down from his original number, and that what he received in return was a low-ball offer that made the hip narrative feel like a convenient excuse rather than a genuine concern. The logic Jones presented in his public response was difficult to argue with from a factual standpoint, because if the UFC genuinely believed he was physically incapable of competing, the question of why they were offering him money to fight at all had no clean answer from the organization side. He also revealed a detail that would become enormously significant in the weeks that followed, that he had received stem cell treatment to prepare for the White House card and had a training camp scheduled to begin on the day the card was announced without him on it. He then made a request that sent shockwaves through the sport, publicly asking the UFC to release him from his contract if they truly felt he was done, and the release request opened a window that Jake Paul's most valuable promotions and a potential super fight with Francis Ngannou both moved into almost immediately. For a brief period, it genuinely looked like Jones and the UFC might be finished permanently, and then Joe Rogan confirmed on the JRE MMA show that he had personally helped Jones access stem cell treatment for his hip at a facility called Ways 2 Well, and that the treatment was working. Rogan's exact words were that Jones did not want to be done, that he knew Jones had received stem cells on his hip because he had helped facilitate it, and that Jones had arthritis in his hip that bothered him but not to the degree where he could not fight, which directly contradicted the public narrative Dana White had been pushing through every press conference. Jones had actually disclosed the stem cell treatment publicly back in August 2025, months before the White House card drama even erupted, meaning he had been actively preparing for the possibility of a return even while the public conversation treated his retirement as settled. The treatment that Rogan helped facilitate and that Jones had been receiving since mid-2025 was cutting-edge regenerative medicine being applied to a condition that White had been publicly describing as career-ending, and the gap between those two descriptions of the same hip is where the entire credibility dispute between Jones and the UFC lives. What Rogan's comments established was that the hip was not the binary career-ender White had framed it as. It was a condition being actively managed by a man who was determined to compete again on terms that made financial sense for someone with his specific leverage and his specific record. While the contract battle and the public feuding were consuming the MMA media landscape, Jones had been channeling his energy into coaching Gable Steveson, the 2020 Olympic gold medalist in freestyle wrestling, who transitioned to MMA in 2025 and went 3-0 in his early professional career, with all 3 wins coming by first-round knockout under Jones's direct guidance. Steveson described his relationship with Jones as everything, saying Jones had essentially created the way he wants to fight in the future, that Jones was his close friend and his coach and everything in between, which is language that reflects genuine mentorship rather than a casual arrangement made for publicity purposes. Even Daniel Cormier, Jones's fiercest rival who fought him twice and has publicly criticized him more times than any other figure in the sport, acknowledged Steveson's genuine potential while on the Ariel Helwani show, saying he believed Steveson had a real chance to become a world champion because his willingness to develop dirty boxing, even at the cost of his greatest skill, boded well for his long-term development. The coaching role gave Jones a legitimate reason to stay connected to the competitive environment of the sport, a daily purpose that kept him physically engaged and mentally present in MMA, even while the contract situation with the UFC remained publicly unresolved and the retirement narrative kept cycling back through the conversation. The Red Corner MMA interview from Russia dropped first on April 10th. Jones relaxed and seemingly at peace, saying his gloves were hung up, and the retirement again narrative built immediate steam across every combat sports platform before the day was over. Then, the Schmo interview landed hours later, with Jones confirming he had spoken to Hunter Campbell, the UFC's chief business officer and Dana White's right-hand executive, that very evening, and that the stem cell treatment he had received right before the White House card was being planned was producing results he could feel physically. The stem cell timing detail is the most significant piece of information in the entire update, because Jones said he got the treatment right before the White House card was being curated, which means the UFC was in active discussions with him about a fight at the same time they were publicly positioning his hips as a disqualifying physical condition. The Campbell conversation suggests both sides found enough common ground to continue talking, which represents a significant shift from a man who was publicly requesting contract release, entertaining offers from Jake Paul, and appearing at Russian bare-knuckle events just weeks before this phone call happened. Tom Aspinall, the man who should theoretically be Jones's primary rival and the fighter Jones's avoidance cost the sport its most anticipated unification fight, has publicly stated that if anyone should be getting paid the money they deserve in this sport, it is Jon Jones, which is a remarkable position for the man who benefited most directly from Jones stepping away. The heavyweight division is in genuine flux heading into the summer of 2026, with the Freedom 250 card at the White House featuring Pereira against Gane for the interim title, and Aspinall still recovering from the eye injury that kept him out of the picture during the entire White House card planning process. Whoever wins the Pereira versus Gane fight creates either a scenario where Pereira sits atop the interim heavyweight division with unfinished business against both Aspinall and Jones, or a scenario where Gane wins and the entire divisional picture reorganizes in ways that could create a compelling reason for Jones to make one final walk to the octagon. Jones said in the Schmo interview that he was going to focus on coaching Gable for now, but that who knows what the future holds, which is the most Jon Jones sentence ever uttered, leaving everything open, committing to nothing, teasing everything, and functioning as the verbal equivalent of a fighter measuring distance in the center of the cage while waiting for exactly the right moment to strike.
The record Jones is protecting with every contract demand and every retirement announcement is 28 wins, 1 controversial disqualification loss, 1 no contest, 15 title fight victories, and over 7 hours of octagon control. The most comprehensive resume of championship-level performance in the history of the sport. His only professional loss came against Matt Hamill via disqualification, a result that both Hamill himself and Dana White have disputed, meaning the case for Jones as the greatest fighter in UFC history is built on a foundation that has never been genuinely cracked inside a cage by any opponent who ever shared one with him. He became the youngest champion in UFC history at 23 years old, conquered 2 separate weight classes, survived suspensions, stripped titles, legal troubles, and controversies that would have ended lesser careers, and has kept the MMA world in a state of perpetual attention toward him for nearly 2 decades without ever becoming irrelevant. The only question that remains, and that nobody inside the UFC or outside of it can answer with genuine confidence on April 11, 2026, is whether the stem cell treatment, the Hunter Campbell phone call, and everything that Jones is and has always been will produce one more walk to the octagon. And the honest answer, based on everything this man has ever done when the sport counted him out, is that you do not count him out.